Hey guys, today we're going to take a step back and get a little bit more philosophical to think about more of a general framework with which to make decisions and choices that will have environmental consequences in mind. So stick around, this video could be helpful. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Here at Saving Green, I generally look at the numbers and look at the science to help you make informed decisions, to help your wallet and the planet at the same time. I think that the process of getting Saving Green up and running has kind of forced me constantly to reassess my decision making, and in that end, I realized that a video exploring my rationale and my approach to a lot of these things may be actually somewhat helpful. I am a proud member of the local Rotary Club here in Boca Raton. Rotary is a nonprofit service organization that allows people in your community to kind of join forces and resources to do good, generally. It's a great organization that has a very, very broad reach all over the country. And what drew me to Rotary is the general philosophy of the club, which is basically providing a general framework to be just a good person. And of course, it's not something that everyone does all the time, and it's not something that I do all the time, but it is something that I've been thinking about more and more. And Rotary provides a four-way test with which you can look at your behavior through the lens of this four-way test, if you will. And it's supposed to be a general guide. This is the four-way test, for those of you who may not know. The first is looking at the thing and determining, is it true? And perhaps at no time in my recent memory has truth been under such assault. If you are building off of information that is not reliable, that is not provable, then you are going off of incorrect information and you're going to run into a lot of problems down the road. So finding out whether something is true is obviously critical. The second component is it fair? Will the action provide general justice? Will someone be disenfranchised? Will someone be disadvantaged? And if so, by how much? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? In other words, is the interaction between the communities or those involved, all the stakeholders, will it promote a better community or will it not? And the last, is it beneficial to all concerned? Not only is it fair, will it help people communicate more effectively and build goodwill, but will it be helpful and beneficial to all the people involved? We know that the world is not always a zero-sum game, and I think that thinking about these four steps is a really helpful way to guide my decision-making. So when it comes to environmental or sustainability-minded purchases or decisions, I thought that a similar approach could be quite helpful. So I've devised a three-way test, if you will. And this Saving Green three-way test incorporates three general criteria: the purpose of the thing that you're buying or doing, the value, and the impact of that thing. Now, if we look at the number one most important thing, which is the purpose, or the question that you're answering, does it satisfy a specific need? This is absolutely critical, because if the thing that you're buying or doing doesn't serve a purpose, you probably shouldn't do it or buy it, because other things are already fulfilling that need for you, or for the community, or for whoever the purpose is intended. So for that reason, if your phone is adequate and doing its job, there's no reason to upgrade if you don't need to. If your car is servicing you just fine and still providing general value, then there's no reason to upgrade your vehicle. So all these things are just absolutely critical, and you can almost stop here if your needs are currently being met. Now, if we realize that there is something that needs to be done, or a task that needs to be fulfilled that is not being satisfied by the current situation, then you need to do something. You need to get something. And therefore, you want to think about the value. And the value, or the price of the item, really comes down to, can you afford what it is that you're considering? Now, this is a slightly more complicated thing to assess, because price and value is not always simply measured in dollars. And sometimes more expensive things can provide more value because they are lasting longer, for example, or they are doing more things than just one singular purpose. So value and purpose must both be met if the thing is to be done. And the last is the impact or the consequences or the effects of that particular action or purpose. And this, of course, is very important to think about and the most opaque and the hardest to measure, and therefore the least often considered, unfortunately. Now, if you think about what are the long-term effects of a purchase, then even just having that question in the back of your mind as the third pillar of this three-way test, it will greatly inform your decision-making and often direct you towards more sustainable purchases, whether you need to or not. Now, the ratio or the relative import of each of these three components is going to be variable. Some purchases are going to have minimal effects, minimal long-term consequences, and minimal cost. For example, buying a packet of pens, you may need a pen and you don't have one, so buying a bunch of plastic pens, minimal cost, minimal impact. But yes, it may not be the most sustainable option long-term, but it may be fulfilling an immediate need, and therefore go ahead and buy the stupid pen. Same thing if you're really thirsty and you're at a convenience store and you need to buy a bottle of water. It wouldn't be a practice that I recommend day to day, but there are situations that require certain purchases to be made, and just thinking about it may be helpful. For example, now that we know that aluminum may be generally more sustainable than plastic, at that immediate point of purchase, you may lean towards an aluminum can versus a plastic bottle, and that may help inform your decision, even though it may not be something that you constantly are thinking about day to day. Now, the relationship between these three pillars can get a little bit more granular. For example, when I think about the balance between fulfilling a need or a purpose and value, I think about the return on that investment, or what are the long-term benefits of that particular purchase. And this is, again, where longevity, repairability, serviceability, durability, all these things really come into play. And therefore, the ROI is important to think about as the intersection between long-term value and the purpose of what it is that you're doing. Furthermore, when you're thinking about a thing or a good and its long-term impacts, then it does beg the question, are there alternatives to this? When you are at a grocery store and you're thinking about paper or plastic, when you're thinking about the need of carrying an item from A to B, both are going to be serving that purpose. One may be more reusable, one may be more biodegradable, and determining what the long-term impacts are of that particular thing should help you make that decision, especially when two things are providing an immediate and tangible benefit that is fairly easy to determine. And then the last intersection is between the impact and value. And in this situation, I think about value not just in terms of financial costs, but also in terms of environmental costs or social costs. And this is the footprint component. Looking at the life cycle analysis of the good or service that you're considering, looking at the supply chain, looking at the materials used, looking at the waste products, looking at the labor, all of these things are important. And again, you don't necessarily have to think about every single question, every single time, every single purchase. But having these three components circulating in the back of your mind will help you naturally kind of make the right decision more often than not. Now, when it comes to impact or the footprint, this is the most opaque and, as I mentioned, the hardest to ascertain. So how do you go about thinking about this? Well, for bigger purchases, long-term purchases, more impactful purchases, there are a lot of resources that can help you. So one thing that you can do straight away is just go to the website directly and see if the company that you're looking at actually prioritizes environmental or sustainable or social human rights practices. And this is a good place to just take a look. You'll often get a sense of what the company's value structure is right away. If companies are putting green, sustainable priorities first and foremost on their mission statement, then you know that this is a company that really does value that. Of course, you can obviously look at third-party things as well. Number one, this component of ESG, or environment, social, governance. This buzzword has really come in vogue in the last couple of years, and there are a lot of companies that are being more upfront and more transparent about where their resources and supply chain is coming from. Are they dealing with corporations or countries where there are human rights violations or unfair trade or taxation protocols? Or are they buying carbon offsets for their transportation supply chain? All these things are important. How this impact is going to be measured will be different for each industry and for each thing that you're looking at. When you're looking at just carbon waste, or when you're looking at toxic exposure or cancer risk or deforestation, All these things come into play, and it's important to step back and look not just at what the company is providing, but at what third parties are assessing. And that's where organizations come in that are starting to look at this on a more technical, data-driven perspective. Bloomberg, for example, has a bunch of resources that you can subscribe to that looks at 11,000 different companies and gets very granular in a series of criteria, which I'm listing here, that will be helpful in determining and valuing not only how their companies are conducting business, but where these companies are investing their money. When you're looking at even buying stocks or bonds or mutual funds, looking at where the dollars are ultimately being invested is not always transparent, and therefore when companies like Bloomberg are looking at this to provide that information to consumers and investors, it is very, very helpful. I made a video a couple months ago about TerraCube and the supply chain of electronics, and Greenpeace, for example, has a survey of a bunch of different electronics manufacturers and gives grades basically to determine whether or not supply chains are being ethical, whether they are following transparency and sustainability principles, and they are looking at this and providing a relative scorecard to normalize all that information for you. And lastly, the government. Here in the United States, we are fortunate that we have a federal government and state and local governments that are required to look at and provide a threshold or a standard of safety for consumers. And that information, when it comes to materials or waste products or manufacturing protocols, is generally required for companies, not only publicly, but any company that is dealing with the American consumer. And most countries have similar protocols, some more or less rigorous, some more or less transparent. Now, while the EPA doesn't specifically look at ESG as a standalone criteria, it is incorporating a lot of these components into their assessments and should be providing more public data in the coming years. So when I take a step back and I think about making environmentally conscious decisions, these are kind of the things that I think about. And I'm not perfect, and I am not someone who is zero waste. I'm not constantly thinking about all these decisions all the time, but by keeping an environmentally guided perspective on things and balancing that with the cost benefits on a more material and granular level of detail, I think that for the most part, we're making decisions that I think are going to be beneficial, not only to us, but for the planet long term. And that's kind of the goal of Saving Green. So here's the Saving Green 3-way test, inspired by Rotary's 4-way test, to help you make decisions to guide you to a more sustainable lifestyle and ultimately a more frugal one as well. So thanks again for watching. I hope this was helpful, and let me know what you think about when you're making decisions every day, and if you have a similar framework. If you found it helpful, please think about subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. Liking the video is also greatly appreciated, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks again.